Hello, my name is William Blake Erickson, and I'm a graduate student at the University of Arkansas in the USA in Jim Lampinen's Law and Psychology Lab. In recent years, we have focused on the topic of missing persons and the efficacy of methods used to recover them. And today, I'll be talking about one of our recent projects, investigating how a person's change of appearance between the photo used in a police alert and their actual live appearance later can affect prospective person memory. So in other words, remembering to be on the lookout for someone being sought by police and contacting police. Now, as you probably know, police use several different methods for disseminating information about missing persons to the public. This is a way of making the public serve as investigators' eyes and ears. And this is accomplished in a number of different ways. Typically, the missing persons alert has a visual component showing a photograph of the individual who has gone missing and contact information for how to notify the police that you encountered this person. These alerts can come in the form of posters, billboards, news flashes on television, text and Facebook alerts are recent developments in getting the message out. And in the United States, these typically coincide with so-called Amber alerts, which are a blanket media coverage about a missing persons alert that serves a bit like a severe weather alert. Now, when researching missing persons cases, we've developed a couple of theoretical frameworks that we call prospective person memory and retrospective person memory. Now, in prospective person memory, a missing persons alert is put out and members of the public are told to be on the lookout for this person and to notify police if they believe that they've seen the missing person. Now, the billboard on the lower left corner of your screen here is a great example of this. It's important to note that the person himself is the cue to remind you to contact authorities. Now, retrospective person memory switches two of these components. Namely, you see the person out in public, you later encounter the alert, and you have to recognize the individual that you saw earlier and then notify authorities. Now, both of these are important ways of examining missing persons alerts, but today we'll just be focusing on prospective person memory. Now, we've recently developed this model here showing the process of prospective person memory as it pertains to a missing persons case. Now, this is a sequential model, and successful recovery of the person relies on each precondition being met. Now, many people are going to encounter the alert, as in step one, and a smaller proportion of these people will actually pay attention to it, as in step two, so that they encode the missing person's face accurately enough so that they can be reminded of it later. Now, a small minority of people will make it to step three. These are the people who actually encounter the missing person out in public. And smaller still, we think, is the number of people who will meaningfully attend to this person that they encounter, which is step four. So just imagine how many people you encounter every day, and you don't really even look at their face, even if you're interacting with them. Now, the person you encounter then has to remind you of the person that you saw in the alert. This is step five. This is the aspect that we examine in our presentation today, incidentally. And finally, the member of the public must take action. Now, you'd think this would be a no-brainer. Of course, someone would take action and notify authorities if they believe they've seen a missing person. But as we'll see later in the presentation, this isn't always the case. Our prior research has illustrated just how difficult prospective person memory is, even in a simulated setting, with a high probability of recovery. Our first study had students across 5 classrooms view a large image of our mock missing person. Half of the students saw him with facial hair and the other half saw him without facial hair. To provide some incentive to contact us if they encountered him later, they were told that they'd receive share of a $100 prize if they find him on campus. Now, 2 days later, the target actually appeared, clean-shaven, in all of the classrooms, bringing papers to the instructor. Now, it's worth pointing out that this is an unusual occurrence during most lectures, so this is something that should draw attention to the individual coming into the class. And before leaving, the target turned to the class, waved, and really over the top, cartoonishly said, "Hello, class!" You'd think this would draw attention to him. Now, after this event, though, only 5% of the students reported citing him. And we thought this may have been because they couldn't recognize him. Yeah, it didn't seem to have a whole lot to do with the appearance change. But we submitted a follow-up lineup identification task, including the target individual, and 75% of the students recognized him in the lineup. So clearly something else was preventing students from reporting their sightings. Now, a similar project added a bit more realism and showed participants a realistically produced missing persons alert in our lab. Now, again, we had a prize of $200 to provide more incentive this time to gain reports. We pre-screened our participants so that we only ran people who regularly ate at cafeterias on the University of Arkansas campus. And for the next 3 days, this person was in a prominent place in one of those cafeterias next to the only entrances, so anyone leaving or entering could see her. Now, we confirmed later that 138 participants were in the dining halls at the same time as the target, and of those, only 8 reported sightings were generated. Now, half of these were correct sightings, so the other half were incorrect. Now, again, we administered a follow-up survey and found this was not due to poor recognition because 84% of the students who took the follow-up survey correctly identified the woman. Now, that takes us to the present study that we'll be talking about today. Now, here we manipulated aspects of a missing persons case related to the final 2 stages of our model, reminding and taking action. Now, we presented video alerts as before, featuring multiple or single photos of the missing person. Photos in the videos either matched or didn't match the person's actual appearance later. We also manipulated participants' expectancy of encountering the person, overtly telling half of the participants that they had a 90% chance of encountering this person in the next few days, and telling the other half that they only had a 15% chance. Finally, we submitted follow-up surveys to ask why people chose or chose not to report their sighting. Now, the study was set up like the one I discussed earlier, but showed one photo or multiple photos matching or not matching the woman's appearance. And there was a 5th condition showing multiple photos showing both appearances. Now, this was perhaps the easiest study we've conducted yet for participants because the woman was actually waiting outside the lab room as participants left, about 10 meters just down the hallway and 5 minutes after participants viewed the alert. Now, as before, participants were asked to notify us if they saw the woman, and we administered a follow-up survey. Now, as you can see here, participants rated the missing persons news alert as more important, concerning, sad, and frightening than the neutral story that participants also viewed. Now, these ratings were on a 7-point scale, so we can conclude here that people sympathized with the missing persons story, especially when they thought it was real. Now, here's our main outcome of interest. Proportion of correct reported sightings. As you can see, showing multiple photos generated the most correct identifications, about 18% in the match and mixed appearance conditions. Now, the single photo matching her appearance also generated 12% identifications, which is a promising finding here. And when appearance did not match the woman's actual appearance, the reports were significantly lower, whether it was multiple photos or a single photo. Now, this is in line with our hypothesis. Now, in the initial survey and in the follow-up survey, we asked participants to indicate their intentions to look for the missing person and whether they actually did look, respectively. Now, we also asked people to indicate how likely they believed they would encounter the target. Now, as you can see here on the x-axis, that's the people's average rating of how likely they think it was that they would encounter the person. And the y-axis shows self-reported intent to look. Those are the blue bars. And the orange bars are self-reported looking behavior when we ask them later. Now, to the left are correlational coefficients between expectancy of encounter and intent to look. and expectancy of encounter and actual looking behavior. And as you can see, expectancy reliably predicted looking intentions, but not self-reported looking. We think this is probably because by the time they took the follow-up survey, they didn't remember what their expectancy was. Now, as you can see here, when we manipulated expectancy of finding the person, most of the identifications came from people who were told that the woman was very near, whereas less identifications came from people with lower expectations. This is an important finding that we'll actually discuss toward the end of the talk. Now, this final piece of data that we collected from our follow-up survey is perhaps the most sobering bit. Now, about 12.5% of participants who completed the follow-up survey reported a sighting to us. Now, that's whether they were correct or incorrect. However, about that many also thought that they saw the woman but chose not to report. Now, of these, about 6% were incorrect sightings and about 7% were correct. Now, this should be disconcerting to investigators because when applied to a real case, this proportion wouldn't just be a few participants in our study like today. This could be hundreds or maybe even thousands of potentially useful tips from the general public that the police aren't getting. Now, even if the tip is a false alarm, this is a pretty benign mistake. The police investigate it and they find out it doesn't check out and then they move on. Now, several participants, though, later also reported to us that in the survey that they didn't want to be embarrassed for being wrong. And this is in an anonymous tip that they could provide, so that's very troubling. Finally, as we can see here, about 75% chose not to report anything because they didn't think they ever saw the woman. Now, from our results, we have a few conclusions that translate directly to policy advice for missing persons cases. Now, first, so that as many people are exposed to the alert as possible, it's important to widely publicize the case. This is pretty obvious. But what's more difficult is avoiding information overload. We found in another experiment that we didn't actually talk about today that exposure to several alerts on a regular basis actually reduces the number of reported sightings. So investigators, media departments should always be devising creative and different ways of drawing the public's attention and retaining it so that they can attend to the alert. So redesigning alert presentations and graphics are probably different ways of accomplishing this. Also, it's important not to discourage participants from the start by lowering their expectations, as we saw here. They must know that they're likely to see the person who is missing. Next, we're a psychology lab. We deal in experimental psychology. So we advocate that departments use principles of memory to facilitate face recognition. Now, as we saw today, using a single photo in the alert doesn't work as well as showing multiple photos because a single photo can be an incorrect match. It's also possible that people attend to single photos less than multiple photos, even if the photos display the same appearance. So looking at two photos, you're going to be looking at them with a bit more critical eye than just a single photo. Now, we don't know from our data today how many photos would be too many, but more than one is certainly better than just one. Finally, the public needs to be encouraged to report any sighting, regardless of their confidence in the sighting, because as we saw today, a large number of people fail to report a sighting, even if it's correct. Now, these non-reported sightings can be a big impediment to recovery, which at the end of the day is what we're all concerned about, maximizing recovery of missing persons. Now, thank you for attending this talk. If you have any other questions, or if you'd like to look at our stimuli or raw data, please notify our first author, James Michael Lampinen, at lampinen@uark.edu. And I'll leave that up on the screen for a moment if you want to write that down. Thank you.